Deep beneath the marble floors of the Vatican lies a library the world was never meant to see. Behind locked vaults and forbidden corridors, a single codex exists, aged, sealed in wax, and inscribed in ink darker than blood. It speaks of 7 rituals, never recorded in any official archive, never whispered from the pulpit. These are not ceremonies for the faithful. They are rites of silence, sacrifice, and shadows, reserved only for the eyes of popes and the souls brave enough to look behind the veil. You were never supposed to read this, but the seal is broken now. Pontifical rite of tears, performed only once in a lifetime, when a man ceases to be himself and becomes the echo of Peter. The bells of St. Peter's Basilica tolled as the white smoke spiraled into the Roman sky, announcing to the world that a new shepherd had been chosen. The square below erupted in applause, but far above the crowd, deep inside the Sistine Chapel, where the final vote had just concluded, I stood motionless beneath the immense judging eyes of Michelangelo's Last Judgment. It was October 16, 1978. My name was Karol Wojtyła, and I had just become Pope. The halls of the Apostolic Palace fell into a reverent hush. Robes rustled, whispers ceased. One of the cardinals gestured, and I was quietly escorted through a narrow corridor adjacent to the Sistine Chapel. The walls here seemed older, untouched by time or restoration. Faded frescoes watched in silence. The air grew cooler, heavier. They opened a door without a word. I stepped inside. This is where the veil begins. The room was dim, lit only by a single iron lantern suspended by a thin chain from the ceiling. The flame inside flickered violently, as if aware of the soul that had just crossed its threshold. They call it Stanza del Pianto, the Room of Tears. It is a name not chosen lightly. There was no throne, no grandeur, only a small table with a crucifix, a kneeler of worn velvet, and 3 papal garments prepared in silence, white cassocks in different sizes, for the one chosen who might not fit the mold. The symbolism was not lost on me. I was alone, and the silence was no longer sacred. It was suffocating. I took one step toward the garments and stopped. The air shifted like a breath exhaled by the walls themselves. Time, in that moment, seemed suspended between 2 eternities, the life I had just left behind and the divine weight now pressing against my shoulders. I knelt and I wept, not from fear, not from sorrow, but from an unshakable awareness that this path could not be turned back. I would never again be simply Karol. Every word I spoke would carry the echo of Peter. Every silence I kept would be interpreted by nations. Every weakness would ripple through the body of Christ. And still, God had chosen me. In the half-light, I whispered, Domine, quid me vis facere? Lord, what do you want of me? No answer came in voice or vision, but something stirred, not outside, but within, as if the Holy Spirit had entered not through the door, but through the marrow of my bones. The lantern above flickered once and then settled into stillness. I stood slowly, my eyes stung by salt and surrender. I chose the middle cassock, not the smallest, not the largest. It dressed in silence. Each button closed not just a garment, but a life, a past, a name. When I emerged, the cardinals were waiting. They saw a white figure approach. But only I knew what had been left behind in that room, the final breath of Karol and the first trembling heartbeat of Peter reborn. And though the world cheered when I stepped onto the balcony, the room of tears still echoed behind me with the breath of God and the weeping of a soul called to carry a cross house not made of wood, but of history, flesh, and eternity. Rorate of the silent heavens, a solitary vigil before the veiled Madonna, in a chamber where even prayers kneel before speaking. The second night came without warning. My first full day as Pope had passed like a storm behind glass. Greetings, ceremonies, voices layered in languages both living and dead. I smiled, I nodded, I blessed. But something inside me remained untouched by it all. Something still kneeling in the room of tears. At dusk, as the Vatican's corridors darkened and only oil lamps flickered in the side chapels, a quiet knock came to my private chamber. I opened the door myself. No one spoke. A monk stood there, hood drawn, hands gloved, face lowered. He did not introduce himself. He simply extended a small lantern toward me. Its wick had not yet been lit. Instinctively, I took it, and so we walked through halls I did not know existed, through doors that whispered as they opened, as if even the wood remembered secrets it had promised never to tell. We descended a narrow stairwell that spiraled deeper than the foundations of the basilica. The air shifted. The stone felt older here, older than Rome itself, perhaps older than memory. We came to a door of ironwood, carved with Latin phrases no theology had ever taught me. The monk turned to me, not with eyes but with presence, and I understood I would go in alone. The door opened, the lantern in my hand sparked to life, though I had not yet struck a flame. Inside was a chapel no larger than a peasant's bedroom. The walls were stone, blackened by centuries of smoke and silence. There were no pews, only a single kneeler. At the center stood a statue, covered entirely by a thick black veil. This was Madonna del Silenzio, the veiled Madonna. It is said no one knows who sculpted her, that she arrived in the Vatican hidden inside a reliquary box sometime in the 3rd century, that even popes are forbidden to unveil her except once a year, and even then, only one. I approached slowly. The veil did not move, but the air around it trembled, as if reality had grown thinner in this place. The lantern in my hand flickered in response, casting shadows across the veil like ripples over dark water. I knelt, not out of obligation, but because my knees gave way under the weight of something unseen, a presence that did not demand, but surrounded. And then, without wind, without hands, the veil shifted, not entirely, just a breath, a fold, enough for the faint outline of a face to emerge through the fabric. She did not speak, but her silence pierced. Her eyes were veiled, yet I felt them inside my chest. They did not comfort me. They did not judge. They simply knew. They saw what I had not confessed. They saw the fear behind my yes, the fracture behind my faith. In that moment, I realized there are places where even popes are stripped of their titles. This chapel was one of them. Here, I was not Peter, not Holy Father, not Supreme Pontiff. Here, I was just a soul. I whispered, not because I wanted to, but because I felt that if I didn't, I might vanish from existence altogether. Mother, if you must reveal my unworthiness, do it gently. The veil fell still. The lantern dimmed, and then I heard it, not in my ears, but in the bones of the chapel itself. Sicut filius fecit, ita fac et tu. As the Son has done, so must you also do. I stayed in that chapel until the flame went out on its own. When I returned, the monk was gone. The stairwell had changed. The Vatican itself seemed rearranged. But I knew the real shift had happened inside me, and though I wore white, something darker had now been sown into my spirit, a silence that watches, a Madonna who never sleeps. The hidden key of the church, a relic of dark metal said to unlock not doors but memories the church chose to forget. It arrived not in ceremony nor in sunlight. There was no choir, no guard of honor, no proclamation. Only a plain wooden box left upon my desk in the Apostolic Palace on the 9th evening of my pontificate. The box bore no seal, no inscription, only the scent of age, old wood, old oil, and something older still, the scent of things never meant to be unearthed. I was alone. The Vatican, at that hour, hummed in hushed stillness. Beyond the marble and columns, the eternal city sighed beneath its veil of stars. Yet in that room, time seemed to halt, as if waiting for me to decide whether to open what had never been shown in daylight. My fingers hovered above the lid. Then I lifted it. Inside was an object far smaller than I had imagined, yet it carried the weight of centuries. A key, made of a metal so black it absorbed light. It was not ornate, no gold, no gems, but etched along its spine in hand-carved Latin were the words, Clavis Mysteriorum Ecclesiae, the key of the mysteries of the church. I had heard whispers of it during my years as a cardinal, nothing more than murmurs between ancient theologians, silenced quickly by glances and the fear of remembering. A relic, they said, a myth. Some believed it had been passed down from the first bishop of Rome himself. Others said it had been forged in silence to guard what even the Holy See dared not speak aloud. But now, here it lay, cold in my palm, no note, no instruction. I held it for a long while, not because I didn't know what it was, but because I sensed what it wasn't. This was not a key to any chamber in the Vatican. It unlocked no doors of marble or steel. It did not belong to the archives, nor to any visible vault. This key was a symbol, and yet more than a symbol. It was permission. Permission to enter into the church's buried memory, into writings not canonized yet preserved, into visions not denied yet never spoken, into the thoughts of popes who had gone mad from what they saw, and those who went silent forever after writing only a single page. Later that week, I found myself within a vault, not beneath St. Peter's, but deep beneath the Apostolic Library in a sub-level even the Swiss Guard do not guard. The room was lined with black volumes wrapped in cloth, each tagged with red wax, not bearing the seal of any nation or order. I did not read them all. Some I touched, but could not open. My hands refused. My soul held back. Others I read and wept. There were things recorded there that no soul should read without prayer, not because they were evil, but because they were true, and too much truth can crush a man unprepared. I remember one document, a letter from a dying pope to a child visionary. The handwriting trembled. At the bottom, a single line, "Tell no one, not because they will not believe, but because they will." When I returned to my room, I placed the key inside the drawer of my writing desk. But I did not lock it away. I let it rest there, bare, visible, a quiet reminder that every word I spoke from then on was being measured not only by heaven, but by the weight of secrets long buried beneath its stones. And though the world would never see that key, I felt it always pressing against my palm, cold, quiet, and endlessly watching. The Mass of the vacant throne, celebrated in the absence of name, congregation, and light, offered not for the dead, but for the absence of the sacred. It does not appear on the liturgical calendar. It is not taught in seminaries, It is not spoken of in conclaves. There is no congregation, no choir, no gospel procession, and yet it is real. It is called in whispers passed between pontiffs, missa vacua, the empty Mass. A Mass said when the chair of Peter has been vacated not only in office, but in soul. It was the 4th hour past midnight, some years before I became what I am now. I was still Cardinal Wojtyła then, but I had been summoned quietly without entourage by a man who wore no insignia, who spoke Latin in the rhythm of ancient prayers, and whose eyes bore the weariness of too many secrets. I was told only this: come and do not ask who has died. We descended through corridors I had never walked, into the crypt beneath the crypt, where even the bones of saints are sealed behind layered walls. At the center of a stone chamber stood a wooden chair, the papal throne, carried there not as a symbol of authority, but as a reminder of its absence. It was empty. Before it, a small altar had been prepared, plain, unadorned, lit by 7 candles of black wax, their flames unusually still, as if even the air refused to breathe. A priest stepped forward. He was not the Pope's confessor, nor a cardinal I recognized. He bore no cross on his chest, no ring, no vestment of state. His chasuble was the deepest crimson, a red so dark it could have been mistaken for dried blood. He began the Mass, but the name of the deceased was never spoken, not in the opening rites, not in the Eucharistic prayer, not even in the final blessing. It was as if the Mass itself was being offered not for a person, but for a presence that once was, and now was not. The silence was the liturgy. No homily, no incense, no bells, only the sound of hands moving across stone, the whisper of Latin prayers cast into the abyss. At the moment of consecration, the priest lifted the host, and the candle flames flickered, not from wind, but as if reacting to an unseen mourning that swept through the space. I dared not blink. When the host was broken, it echoed like a crack through marble. And then just before the final dismissal, the priest turned to the empty throne and whispered a phrase I would never forget: "Sic transit anima Petri." Thus passes the soul of Peter. The candles were extinguished. The host was consumed in full by the celebrant. No fragments remained. No chalice returned to the sacristy. It was as if the Mass had consumed itself. And then we left. No words were exchanged, no names recorded. But in the breathless corridor back toward the known world, I realized the chair of Peter is not merely a seat. It is a vessel. When it is empty in body, we grieve, but when it is empty in spirit, we invoke this rite, not to remember a pope, but to plead with heaven that the church not follow him into the dark. The miserere of blood, a vow spoken in silence during the hour of assassination, when a pope offers his life not as victim, but as vessel. The light in the hospital room was not of this world. It was pale, silent, without warmth. Outside the windows of the Comelli Clinic, Rome still slept, but inside, time had curled into itself, and only the rhythm of the heart monitor tethered me to this world. It was May 13th, 1981, and I had been shot in the chest by a man whose name I remember, but whose eyes I have long since forgiven. The bullet had torn through my flesh, missing my heart by the width of a rosary bead. I should have died, and perhaps, for a moment, I did. But death is not always a door. Sometimes it is a mirror. As the doctors worked, hands urgent, voices sharp beneath their masks, I fell inward, down a stairless descent into the cave of my soul. And there, in that place beyond pain, I heard the old vow, The Miserere, it is not written in any book. It is not passed through documents or catechism. It is whispered from pope to pope, often with shaking hands and tear-filled eyes. A vow reserved for the few who understand that sometimes the weight of the church must be carried not by decree, but by sacrifice. Lying there, wrapped in machines and holy terror, I whispered it aloud, not to the doctors, not to the nurses, but to the Christ who bled before me. If you would save your bride from fracture, then take me as the price. If the wolves have found the gate, let them tear the shepherd, not the sheep. If there is rot in the bones, then burn it in me. Let my blood cover those who have none to cry for them. My lips trembled, not from pain, but from the gravity of what I had offered. This was not martyrdom. This was not sainthood. This was a bargain made in the silence between two heartbeats. And as I lay there, something happened. Not a vision, not a voice, but the pain dulled, not from medicine, but from presence. I could feel a warmth at my right side, like someone sitting beside me, someone who had once stood at the foot of a wooden cross and held the body of her son after the world had finished with him. It was her, the Virgin, not as statue, not as painting, but as companion in suffering. She said nothing. She only pressed her silence into mine until we were the same wound. Later, the doctors said I had lost too much blood. They called it a miracle, but I knew the miracle was not that I survived. The miracle was that I returned, willing to die again. From that day forward, every word I spoke, every nation I touched, every hand I raised in blessing, it all came from a soul that had already crossed the river and chosen not heaven, not rest, but to bleed slowly for as long as the church would need it. And so, my child, shall I take you now to part 6? Into the most forbidden of all chapels, where a statue remembers what even heaven will not speak aloud, the obscured Virgin and the statue that weeps no more. A forgotten statue in obsidian stone, whose eyes remain closed until the final fire of the church is lit. Not all relics are made of bone. Some are carved from memory, and memory, when buried deep enough, becomes haunting. There is a chapel in the Vatican that does not appear on any tour, any plan, any architectural record. Its name is not spoken aloud, not even in the papal palace. We call it only this: La Cappella del Non Detto, the chapel of the unspoken. It rests beneath the north transept of St. Peter's Basilica, accessible only by a narrow passage sealed by a symbol, not a lock. The stone bears a simple carving, a mother kneeling, her face turned away. Only the Pope and one other soul, the guardian of the threshold, are permitted to pass. I first entered this chapel 2 years after the shooting, on a night when thunder pealed over Rome like the drums of judgment. The guardian, a monk whose name I never asked, lit a single torch and gestured for me to follow. We walked in silence. As we descended, the air changed. It no longer smelled of incense or damp stone. It smelled of dust and wax and sorrow. At the end of the passage, the door opened, not by touch, not by key, but as if it recognized me. Inside, the space was impossibly still. A single altar stood in the center, untouched by time. But it was what stood behind the altar that arrested my breath. A statue, but not just any statue. It was her, the Virgin, not as Queen of Heaven, not as Mother of Joy, but as Mother of the Forsaken. She stood, carved in obsidian black stone, arms not outstretched, but folded over a heart that had already broken. Her eyes were not cast downward, but closed, not in sleep, not in peace, but in refusal, as if to say, what I have seen, I will not see again. No artist's name is known, no era can be dated. But the lore handed from pope to pope claims that the statue was not made by human hands. It simply appeared. Some say it was born of the weeping stones of the catacombs. Others say it arrived the night a pope lost his faith and begged God for a sign. Either way, it has never been moved. It cannot be moved. I approached with slow steps. The silence in that room was not absence. It was presence, a heavy, holy grief. I knelt, and I could not speak, not even in thought, because this was a place where even prayers must first pass through pain. There, before the obsidian virgin, I laid not my petitions, but my failures, every word I had spoken in haste, every truth I had withheld in fear, every soul I had not reached in time, and I waited, not for a voice, not for a vision, but for her to open her eyes. She never did, because her eyes are reserved for the end, when the last lie falls, and the church must finally face its reflection in the water of martyrdom. I left that chapel altered. I did not walk out. I was carried by silence. Since then, I have returned only once. On the night I signed a letter none shall read until long after my bones return to dust. A letter sealed not with wax, but with a single black ribbon knotted in the sign of the cross, and laid at her feet, where truth waits, veiled and watching. The name without a crown, the hidden pontiff who was chosen but never crowned, the one who walks among shadows so that the church may walk in light. They say that every pope dreams on his third night, not just a dream, but a visitation, of a voice that does not echo, of a figure who never shows his face. Some wake screaming, others weep in silence, but all remember, on my third night, long after the balcony cheers had faded and the papal apartment lay in shadows, I did not sleep in my chamber. I lay instead on the cold floor of the private chapel, a single candle lit, facing the crucifix, and I begged God not to show me what I was not ready to see. But heaven does not barter with fear. In the second hour of night, I fell not into sleep, but into something far deeper, a stillness so absolute it felt like the soul of time had stopped breathing. There was no room, no floor, no sky, only a corridor of wind, cold and shapeless, and at the end of it, a man kneeling. His back was to me. He wore no white, no ring, no crown, only a robe of ash gray and a cord of thorns tied at the waist, as if to bind his humility to his body. He did not turn. He only spoke, though not with a voice. His words arrived inside my bones, ancient and echoing, as though spoken by every martyr who had ever died without an altar. You sit on a throne I was never given. I opened my mouth to ask who he was, but the question shattered in my throat because I already knew. There is a name passed between popes, one name, one soul. He is not listed in the annals, not sculpted in marble, not mentioned in the acts of the church, but his sacrifice holds the line between faith and fire. They call him only Il Mai Nato, the never crowned. The story, if one dares call it that, says he was chosen but refused, elected by divine fire in an age when fire consumed all. But he knelt before the throne and said, I cannot wear the crown while so many wear chains. So he vanished. Some say into the catacombs, others say he walked still, cloaked in rags, feeding the poor, praying with the mad, the pope who became no pope so the church might remain church. And in that dream, he rose slowly, still not facing me. He placed a hand upon the wall beside him, and where his fingers touched, The stone cracked, not in destruction, but as if the wall had longed to break open for him. "One day," he said, "my name will be spoken from the altar, not as Pope, but as the voice of every silent one who was never heard." Then he vanished. I woke with blood on my palm, 5 marks across the skin, as if I had gripped thorns in sleep. The candle had gone out. The crucifix on the wall was damp, as though someone had leaned their forehead against it and wept. I have never spoken of this until now, but know this: there is one among the saints not canonized, one among the popes not named. And when the final fire comes and the church must pass through it once more, it is his name that will rise first, spoken not by man, but by God. You have seen what few eyes were ever meant to see. 7 rituals, hidden beneath centuries of silence and sealed behind stone thicker than memory. These are not the ceremonies of the church you know. They are not written in the catechism. They are not sung in basilicas. These are the rituals that exist between the lines, where faith meets fire and thrones are built not of gold, but of sorrow. And now, you cannot unknow them. The veil has been pulled back, if only slightly. The flicker of torchlight has touched the ink. The shadows stirred. Perhaps you feel it already, that quiet gravity pulling you deeper, as if the Vatican itself is whispering from its marble bones. What you have learned is only the beginning. For beyond these 7, there are more rites yet unnamed, statues that weep in locked chambers, letters that bleed through the page, a final name unspoken, waiting beneath St. Peter's bones. So ask yourself one last question. Was it you who found these rituals, or did they find you?